Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show. We've got a bang-up show for you today. We're going to have a guest, Dr. Zachary Marshall. He's the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform, joining us today to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses and what can be done to stop that. So stay tuned for that interview, as well as there's a watchdog report out that describes the anti-Semitism and stats that we're starting to see around the country and around the globe as well. Janet Yellen dodges questions as to whether or not the Biden Treasury Department urged banks to search private transactions of Americans and surveil them. Also, pro-life leaders are urging Republican leadership to repeal the FACE Act in lieu of the conviction of these peaceful pro-life protesters. And lastly, a grand jury vindicates 5 COVID claims that you weren't allowed to talk about. All of that and more coming up on this edition of the Carl Jackson Show. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Carl Jackson Show. We are your daily dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. And also welcome to our SNC TV audience. Today I'm joined by my guest. He's the editor-in-chief at Campus Reform, Dr. Zachary Marshall. And he's here to talk about the rise in anti-Semitism on college campuses and why he's bullish on the end of the left's power over higher education. Dr. Zachary Marshall, welcome to the Carl Jackson Show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, yeah, absolutely, man. I had a colleague of yours, and God forgive me, I forget his name, but you guys do excellent work at Campus Reform, so I encourage you to check out their website and see what they're up to. They just keep us in tune with what's happening on college campuses and how far they've gone. Let me start with this, Doctor. Again. Obviously, anti-Semitism is on the rise, but it seems to me that academia in America in general, there's a big problem here because it seems to be a breeding ground when it comes to higher education for anti-Semitism, for anti-Americanism. And frankly, I think when you see anti-Americanism on a college campus, anti-Semitism has to be there too, I'd imagine. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. That's something we've been trying to convey to Americans at Campus Reform now for years. We've had a professor at CUNY, the City University of New York, on, and we've done other reports and data trends showing that there's a fundamental correlation between being anti-Israel, being anti-American, and being anti-Western. This is not merely being opposed to America, opposed to Israel, hating the West, hating Jews. This is a very complex, multi-layered ideology that's going on in higher education. So they hate anything that comes off as Western. So that would be capitalism, that would be free trade, that would be white men and women. And within higher education, a lot of those scholars see Jews and Israelis as, they wrongly see them as only white, as only Western, as only capitalist. So it's very much, hate from all sides in their leftist ideologies being focused squarely on Jews on campus. And that's what makes higher education so unsafe for Jewish students right now.
And honestly, I got to say this too. I mean, obviously, we're talking about anti-Semitism, but I mean, whether you're a conservative, a Jew, a patriot, someone that just loves America, you're not going to be loved on college campuses. But right now, I mean, obviously, the rise in Jew hatred is just absolutely insane. It's almost as if October 7th was a gift, it seemed, to the anti-Semites to come out of the closet. I mean, I don't think I've seen anything like it. I sit here as a black conservative, and again, I'm speaking to my guest, Dr. Zachary Marshall. He's the editor-in-chief at Campus Reform, but I sit here as a black conservative, and I say, you know what? I have it good in America compared to what Jews have to go to. It's insane. Let me go here, Doc. Is it possible that Jews are hated because many Jews are successful, not because they're just they're racist and they keep other people down, but it's just because they follow a biblical worldview, they follow the Ten Commandments, and they believe in tradition, specifically family tradition. So in a sense, it's family privilege. that people seem to hate a lot of these students.
Yeah, absolutely. The Jews, American Jews, a lot of them have been the beneficiaries of assimilation and of the puritanical work ethic that has existed in America for generations. And these are traditions in America that the left despises. So the left looks at Jews as people, as a people who have come to America over centuries and embraced American values and have a lot of us have done well by them. And the left can't stand that because they see it as affirmation of a set of Western values and traditions that they despise. But what the left will never teach you, and you can spend 4 years in higher ed and never learn this, is that a lot of Jews aren't white and a lot of Jews aren't rich or privileged.
Sure.
Look at, the state of Israel, for example, that is largely settled by Mizrahi Jews. Those are Jews from the Middle East, and Sephardic Jews. Those are Jews from Spain and North Africa. These are Jews that were kicked out of their homelands where they had lived for hundreds of years and only had Israel to settle in. So if Israel didn't exist, they would have been killed off or banished to another end of the earth. So what we see with racism against Jews is that the left always sees Jews as white and privileged, and that's a falsehood. They will never acknowledge the non-white Jews that exist in this country, whether they're from Yemen or Iran or Ethiopia. They will only look at European Jews and tell everyone that stereotype is the Jew world over.
Doc, I'm looking at my notes in front of me here, and it says that you've submitted 21 Title VI complaints documenting universities' negligent responses to anti-Semitism on their campuses. Basically, it says you're very concerned about the safety and well-being on campus. What exactly is Title VI?
Title VI is a statute that is enforced by the Office for Civil Rights within the Education Department in the federal government. And what these complaints state is that as recipients of federal funding, these universities have an obligation to handle and respond accordingly to acts of discrimination on their campuses when those acts target individuals based on a shared ethnicity. So my complaints to these, I think I'm up to 23 now, I just submitted to this week, argue that these universities either ignored or mishandled publicly documented cases of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred on the universities. And they responded in a way that never would have happened had it been another minority. You talked about, discrimination you might face as a Black American. The one difference here is that, when we talk about racism against Black people, there's not really a culture of denial. Everyone kind of understands what racism looks like when it's against Black Americans. When Jews talk about anti-Semitism, they have to prove unprecedentedly what has happened and argue that it is discrimination. So the universities always seem to find a way to excuse racism against Jews as political speech or constitutionally protected speech, or as an incident that Jews should just learn to get over and deal with. So I filed these complaints because I was outraged at the situation, and I'm happy to say that they've resulted in 7 open investigations that the Department of Education is now looking into, most recently at Indiana University.
Yeah, that is good news. And frankly, I hate to say this, but I believe it to be true. I'm glad that you're offering these complaints in an election year. Nothing like making sure that the left are running scared during an election year. It's sad, but that's just where I'm at. It almost seems like it's become cool to be anti-Jewish on college campuses. And I got to tell you, again, I'm speaking to my guest, Dr. Zachary Marshall. He's the editor-in-chief at Campus Reform. Make sure you check out the website. I'm still baffled that so many donors to these institutions, many Ivy League specifically, are Jewish donors. And frankly, I don't think that you wipe out anti-Semitism on these campuses without completely wiping out DEI. What say you, Doc? We have about a minute and a half left in this block.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I wrote my op-ed for Fox News earlier this year about where I see DEI going. And I'm arguing the piece that I'm bullish on the end of DEI. The wave of anti-Semitism we saw last fall opened Americans' eyes to the real problem here. For years now, Americans, and especially Jewish Americans, were in denial about the extent of the hate that exists on these college campuses. They always thought, well, these are good people, they mean well. You have to give them benefit of the doubt. No, we don't when they want to invoke intifada against us. So we've seen the repeal or ban of DEI spending and programming in multiple states. Indiana, for example, is now the latest state to be taking action against DEI. So I think we're now in a time, fortunately, where people are no longer buying the lies and distortions that are coming from the academy. They see through the lies that this is not hatred, that this is not anti-Semitism. DEI trainings across the country, whether it's Stanford or another school, never once included Jews as a minority, never once said that Jewish students could experience anti-Semitism. So these ideas pretty much taught college students how to divide amongst themselves and hate each other. So it's time for them to go, and I think we are going to see them go at some point.
Yeah, we definitely have to. I mean, you're not going to end racism by using racism to do that. And I'm convinced that many on the left, for one, I got to be honest with you, I'm convinced many on the left don't know what racism is, and that's why this continues. So anyway, we'll be back with our guest, Dr. Zachary Marshall of Campus Reform. We'll see you in a few. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. I'm joined by my guest, Dr. Zachary Marshall of Campus Reform. Go out and check out the website, Campus Reform. Is it campusreform.org, Doc?
It is, yes.
All right, so campusreform.org. If you want to know how far the left is going or has gone on college campuses and how your kids are being brainwashed, you should check out campusreform.org. It'll keep you young for those of you that are a tad bit older, like myself, and keep just keep you informed of what's happening in today's culture on college campuses. Doc, I gotta be straight with you. I'm concerned that this anti-Semitism and DEI, CRT, all of this stuff is so pervasive already within our culture that it's going to be very difficult. I'm talking about a generational issue that we'll need to take on in order to stump it out.
I think you're right. I think the generational issue we're facing right now is learning loss, and that comes from what universities did to students during COVID with the lowering of standards, taking away of standardized testing, rampant grade inflation. And when those things went away, what got put in their place was DEI, was social justice activism. For one example I want to call out is what happened at CUNY earlier this week. We saw them trying to do a whole seminar on activism students can do in the streets of New York City to promote solidarity with anti-Israel activists in Palestine. Where's the education in that? We see, every year we see the proficiency among students get lower and lower, and we see that employers are saying that college no longer prepares students for the workforce or for life after graduation. And, public universities like CUNY are spending their resources on social justice activism, not on the classroom. So we need to see the universities restore the traditional priorities of higher education for this to be fixed.
Are you under the impression that we need to cut out some of these grants for higher education, federal grants for higher education? I'm of the opinion, and I mean, some of these schools are sitting on such endowments, and people go to school when they absolutely, I'm sorry, there's some people that are just too dumb to go to college. I mean, let's be completely honest. I mean, I didn't go to college. I don't think I'm dumb. I just didn't think that I needed to go. I went for a couple of years. I had I built a business, and then there was just life. Life took over. But I look at some people that go into college. I wonder why they're there in the first place. And then even when they graduate, I'm like, these are some of the dumbest people that I've come in contact with. They have no common sense. I mean, this is insane. What needs to happen with these federal student loan programs that we're forgiving a lot of them now, it seems?
Yeah, so my answer to that is two-part. One is a little counterintuitive as a conservative. I think the federal funding of universities and university and higher education programs is, it's part of the solution because when the government funds these things, they can exert oversight and accountability. So to me, we don't need to like start with taking money away. We need to start exercising that kind of oversight and accountability. And I think the education and workforce committees work in the House is a great example of what can be doing with that. They, did the congressional testimony with Claudine Gay and Liz McGill, and now they're threatening to subpoena Harvard for materials that Harvard is refusing to give them. So that's what it looks like when the government has a stake in this. When it comes to student loans, we're seeing Biden yet again promising another nearly $5 billion. I think the number is $4.9 billion. Amount of cancellations. This is just a vote buying scheme. It does nothing to lower the costs of higher education, and it does nothing to instill responsible financial habits among Americans. Campus Reform has been reporting for years that the rise in tuition and the rising cost of college are not due to the rising cost of teaching. It's due to the expansion of student services, of student affairs, of beautification of schools. So all the things that college doesn't need to be is the reason why higher education gets more expensive every year.
Sure.
So the first thing we need to do is to find a way to make universities lower the cost of operation and attendance so that Americans have more choice and ability to go to the schools they want to and to not be saddled with thousands of dollars worth of debt that they're then going to demand the government cancel for them.
Okay, let me circle back if I can, Doc. And I'm speaking to Dr. Zachary Marshall. He's the editor in chief for Campus Reform. I want to go back to this issue of federal grants and accountability. And I see your point. That is a very good point. But what if, it just happens that Republicans were in charge of Congress, people that actually believe in freedom and want people not to be indoctrinated on college campuses, but educated. But what happens, my concern is what happens when you have Democrats who, in my opinion, have been co-opted by the Marxists and their party when they're in charge, because I believe that there is a new morality that's being taught on these college campuses, and it explains the anti-Semitism. It explains the anti-Americanism, and this new morality is just Marxism. I mean, I think that's the easiest way to put it. So I'm just concerned that as our government becomes filled with more and more of these people, I think we need to wipe out DEI, and I'd like to see more private funding of higher education, like we had prior to President Barack Obama.
Oh, well, I think, the canceling federal funding, that has to be on the table, but I think conservatives are better off by starting with accountability and seeing what we can enforce first before we go to canceling federal funding. That should be a punishment for inaction, not necessarily what we do to get rid of DEI. DEI absolutely has to go, and I think a lot of it exists on college campuses because there's a lot of student conduct rules on the books. There's a lot of policies that exist in university offices that are not being enforced by choice, whether it's to the benefit of the preferred minorities or ideologues on campus or to the discrimination of Jews or other, unwanted minorities on campus. So if we're able to take what already exists and then just apply it equally to everyone, I think we're going to see a lot of change that way. It won't solve everything, but I think that's where we need to start.
Yeah, no, that is a fair point. I want to talk to you real quickly. We have just 3 minutes left here about this report from the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's Anti-Semitism Research Center. Man, that is a mouthful, but they identified 468 anti-Semitic reports worldwide in January alone. That's an average of 15.1 daily incidents. Among those they report were 52 physical threats and 87 incidents of anti-Semitic vandalism. You've spoken about what you've seen on college campuses and the rise in anti-Semitism attacks since October 7th, since the attack on Israel on October 7th on college campuses. What have you seen?
What I've seen, I've seen reports and videos of Jewish students getting punched because they're Jewish, and tackled and harassed. I have spoken to Jewish students and other pro-Israel allies who on campus who are scared, and they're on the verge of tears in their dorm rooms because they're terrified of people who live on the same floor as them, and they're the ones who are organizing the intifada protests on campus, but these students don't know where to speak out. So I'm seeing a environment in which Jews, no matter what they do, they always seem to be in the wrong, and Jewish students have been struggling to have a voice and to be able to stand for themselves in the last few months, which is why I have done the Title VI complaints and why I've tried to be as vocal as possible about this issue. I just had an op-ed come out in Daily Wire yesterday about the CUNY incident, which was finally canceled after campus reforms called the university and asked what exactly they were planning. But I'm also seeing progress, and I'm seeing, some Jewish students start to speak up and find their voice. So I think we might see the tide turning as we head into the spring semester.
Let me ask you this. We only have about 40 seconds left here. As a result of the anti-Semitism that we see and the rise of it on college campuses, ironically, it's just like the black community, Jews tend to vote left. Are you starting to see a shift in that mentality? 30 seconds.
Not really, to be honest. The best metaphor I can give to people who aren't Jewish is that liberalism to Jews is what Catholicism is to the Irish. And
Makes sense.
I think we're starting to see a lot of centrist and, center-left Jews start to question their values and their assumptions, but I'm not convinced that's translating into a difference in voting right now.
All right. Well, we'll keep working on them. Dr. Zachary Marshall of Campus Reform, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back in a few. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. I'm glad you could join me. For those of you that are out there listening or viewing this show, I would encourage you to please join me on all things social media at the Carl Jackson Show is where you can find me. I am on X, Instagram, True Social, Getter, Facebook, wherever I am on social media. The Carl Jackson Show is where you can go to find me. Also, please subscribe to my podcast, The Carl Jackson Show. The Carl Jackson Show, is where you can find me wherever you go to get your podcast. We would sincerely appreciate that. And please be sure to support our sponsors. Otherwise, we can't stay on air. Sponsors like MyPillow.com that has great deals available to you right now. Deals that are some upwards of 60% off. All you have to do is go to MyPillow.com, click on that promo code or the radio podcast square at the top of the page and enter my name, Carl, as your promo code, CARL. Guys, without any further ado, I want to go to a video that occurred earlier this week. This is the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and she's being asked some very straightforward questions that she dodges, questions on whether or not the Treasury Department urged banks to search private transactions for, let's say, conservatives. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and roll this video, guys.
Has Treasury including FinCEN or federal banking agencies like the Fed, FDIC, OCC, instructed financial institutions to search Americans' legal transactions in attempts to surveil their purchases.
Well, we received a letter from you, I believe, on this topic, and we intend to investigate fully and to respond.
Have you instructed banks and financial institutions to provide this information?
Well, FinCEN's job is to work with financial institutions to make sure.
Are they instructing, ma'am, financial institutions to search Americans' legal transactions in attempts to surveil their purchases?
I promise a thorough look into everything.
Well, this is really
occurred.
concerning.
Okay. All right. So there you heard her, or there you saw it for yourself. You have the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen dodging the question. She knows the answer. Did you sick your department on American conservatives, American patriots? Yes or no? This is a simple yes or no question. Guys, listen, we're going to have a guest joining us later on in the program to talk to you about the rise in anti-Semitism that is occurring across college campuses. But it isn't just anti-Semitism, it just isn't Jews that the left hates. They hate Western civilization. They hate anyone that loves America. It's really as simple as that. And they hate Jews because they believe that Jews are colonialist, and frankly, I think they believe that of every single one of us in some type of weird way. If you're black and conservative, you're as they called Larry Elder, the white face of black supremacy, or the black face of white supremacy. LA Times. That these people are crazy. These people are communists. These aren't your average everyday Democrats that we are dealing with. And until more Americans realize that, this country is in deep trouble. This isn't a Republican Democrat thing anymore. We have moved beyond that phase. This is a battle for ideals. This is a battle for Western civilization. Again, just talking about the context of the video that Gabe shared at the beginning of this block, you have the Treasury Department that's urging financial institutions to examine legal purchases for signs of quote-unquote extremism. And you have the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, that cannot answer a straightforward question. There doesn't need to be any investigation done. If she, as the head of the Treasury, didn't sick the Treasury on conservatives, she would know the answer. In fact, she does know the answer. Let's be real. All right, so this is what the Congresswoman Ann Wagner was asserting. I mean, these people have urged banks as a result of the events of January 6th, going back to 2021. So we're talking about 3 years now, and you have the Treasury Department that is still trying to prosecute people that visited the Capitol, that were near and around the Capitol on January 6th just because they supported the then President of the United States, Donald Trump. This is insane. This is crazy. This is what you see in police states. And that's exactly what we're living in. We're living in a police state. Now, here's what the Treasury Secretary were allegedly asking banks to search for. They wanted them to search for purchases with terms like MAGA. You guys might remember hearing about this. MAGA, Trump, Dick's Sporting Goods, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, while warning that the sale of quote-unquote religious texts, such as Bibles, could be indicated as extremism. Are you kidding me? Hat tip to the Daily Wire for that information, by the way. So if you want to make America great again, apparently you're an extremist. Apparently you're a terrorist. Why? Because you think America is good in the first place. And you have a lot of these college students, you have a lot of these academics, you have a lot of these bureaucrats like Janet Yellen that apparently think America is evil, that apparently think that Western civilization is evil. If you like Trump, if you like the former president, apparently if you like a good job and you want to pay lower taxes and you want energy independence and you don't want to be involved in every foreign war possible, apparently you're an extremist. If you like lower gas prices and you like to be able to afford your mortgage or your rent, or be able to afford a new car or even a nice used car, apparently you're an extremist. If you go to places like Dick's Sporting Goods or Cabela's, where they have fishing tackle and where they have ammunition and firearms, apparently you're an extremist. If you go to places like Bass Pro Shops, apparently you're an extremist. Guys, this is I can barely put this in words. But we are watching, if the left can end it, the end of Western civilization. And it is going to be up to people like you and I to stop this. Representative Jim Jordan of the Treasury Department, or Representative Jim Jordan, I'm sorry. He's the House Judiciary Committee chair. Here's what he had to say after January 6th, and referring to what Janet Yellen had to say. Here's what he said. Actually, let me just quote from the column. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan stated in a letter that after January 6th, the Treasury Department's Office of Stakeholder Integration and Engagement in the Strategic Operations of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network sent banks outlines, typologies of various persons of interest, as well as, quote, suggested search terms and merchant category codes for identifying transactions on behalf of federal law enforcement, close quote. Also, according to Representative Jim Jordan, he says the analysis, FinCEN, which you heard Janet Yellen refer to, warned financial institutions of extremism indicators that include transportation charges such as bus tickets, rental cars, or plane tickets for travel areas with no apparent purpose, or the purchase of books, including religious texts and subscriptions to other media containing extremist views. Well, who gets to determine what an extremist is? Joe Biden? Janet Yellen? Merrick Garland? Alejandro Mayorkas, who, by the way, what a shame that we couldn't get him impeached this week. That is an indictment on the Republican Party, quite frankly, and hopefully they will get it right the next time around. We can only hope and pray. But in other words, Jim Jordan continues that FinCEN used large financial institutions to comb through the private transactions of their customers for suspicious charges on the basis of protected political and religious expression. This is a police state. This is a surveillance state. They want to know exactly everything you're doing. The left wants to know who they should fear. You see, the people that don't visit, at least they presume, the people that don't go fishing or go hunting or love guns and rifles, or the people that aren't clinging to their Bibles, to what was it that the former President Barack Obama said? The people that aren't clinging to their Bibles and guns, those are, they don't have to worry about the people that aren't clinging to Bibles and guns. They've got them. They can brainwash them. But if you believe in individual liberty, if you believe in the Second Amendment, if you believe in the Bill of Rights, if you believe in a God other than the government, then the left is fearful of you. It's as simple as that. They want government to be your God. That's what you have to understand. They want to control your life. They want to control what you do. They want to control what you say. They even want to control how you spin when you get down to it. Representative Ann Wagner, she went on to press Janet Yellen, and she asked or stated, increasingly we are hearing the federal government is suggesting banks search private financial transactions using highly partisan political terms or check to see if customers made purchases that could be associated with legal sales of firearms or even religious texts, quote unquote. Whereas, and then you had Janet Yellen respond. Or she asked Janet Yellen, has Treasury included FinCEN or federal banking agencies like the Fed, FDIC, OCC, instructed financial institutions to search Americans' legal transactions in attempts to surveil their purchases? Guys, you saw the answer. You saw the answer. The answer is yes. Janet Yellen just did not respond. It's as simple as that. Guys, this is the beginning of a police state, and it's just getting started. This is the Carl Jackson Show. We'll be back on the other side. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. This is your daily, or in this case, if you're watching SNC TV, your weekly dose of objective truth in a world of confusion and lies. Guys, a couple of other issues that I want to talk to you about. Obviously, the president, or the Colorado ballot case hit the Supreme Court. or is hitting the Supreme Court as of today. I think that should be a unanimous decision. Obviously, by the time this show airs, we will know for sure, but that should be a unanimous decision. There's no way that that Colorado has the power to keep former President Donald Trump off the ballot using the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the Constitution, that was frankly written for insurrectionists from the Democrat Party, the Confederacy, and it was not talking about a person like a president that was already in power, already holding the presidency. So it's a totally nonsensical legal argument. Most people know that, but honestly, you have a bunch of woke leftists inside of these courts sitting on these benches, so they may not care. But I suspect that the Supreme Court of the United States will shoot this down. Trump is not an insurrectionist. There's no evidence whatsoever that he's an insurrectionist. And as more evidence comes out about the J6 committee and all of the nonsense, the theatrical play that they put on for the American people, it's being exposed. As a matter of fact, the pipe bomber. Remember that pipe bomber that set a bomb at the DNC that night, and the DNC. No, I'm not sure if it was the DNC headquarters right now. Don't recall, unbelievably. But anyway, where Kamala Harris could have been bombed, she could have been killed. Yet the January 6th committee was not interested in that whatsoever. Does that make any sense to you? Of course not. Guys, listen, Western civilization is under attack. And how do you destroy Western civilization if you're an American leftist? One of the ways in which you do is you make sure that you destroy the people that believe in America, that you destroy the people that believe in Western civilization and the virtues and the values of Western civilization. So I want to take you to another column that I read at the Daily Wire that's entitled "Pro-Life Leaders Urge Republican Leadership to Repeal the FACE Act After Conviction of Peaceful Pro-Lifers." And I've got to do this myself. Carl, make sure, I'm just doing a reminder live here on air, make sure that you call Speaker Mike Johnson today and tell him to repeal the FACE Act. And so should you. Those of you in the listening audience, even if you consider yourself pro-choice, which I hope you do not, but even if you do, you should make this call, and hopefully I can convince you as to why. But here's the summary. So a coalition of pro-life leaders are urging House Republican leadership to take up legislation that would repeal the FACE Act in the wake of 6 pro-lifers being convicted over a peaceful demonstration at a Tennessee abortion facility. So there was a letter that was written. I believe the Daily Signal obtained the letter, and it asked House Speaker Mike Johnson and Jim Jordan of the House Judiciary Committee to take up legislation to repeal the FACE Act. Now, for those of you that may not be aware, the FACE Act is a Clinton-era law that criminalizes the use of force or threats of force that prevent someone from accessing an abortion facility. So you guys might remember back in the day, you used to have some crazy nut jobs that would sit out at these abortion clinics that threaten to kill the doctors and so on, etc. All right, so you don't see a lot of that today, thank God. All right, that's not how we want to deal with that situation, and I would condemn any situation like that, as would any decent person. But according to a letter that was headed up by the conservative group Advancing American Freedom, here's what they had to say. In the aftermath of additional pro-life activists being convicted by the Biden administration under the FACE Act for peacefully protesting outside an abortion business, we respectfully urge you to take immediate legislative action to protect peaceful pro-life activists from the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Justice and an unconstitutional law. Guys, let me just remind you, if you're in the state of New York, you can be an illegal alien and you can beat up police officers and you'll be arrested and you'll be released the very same day. But if you sit in front of an abortion clinic, and by the way, these people, what were they doing in front of this abortion clinic? All right, so the protest, just so you know, took place in a hallway outside of a Mount Juliet abortion provider. This occurred in March of 2021, March 5th to be specific. And on that day, the demonstrators gathered on the second floor of an office building in the hallway outside outside the Carafem Health Center clinic. So they weren't inside, they were outside in the hallway. They gathered, the group prayed, they sang hymns, and they urged women showing up to the clinic not to get abortions. That's not like, you see that all the time. Frankly, I go to a chiropractor, and the chiropractor that I attend is right next door to a Planned Parenthood clinic. Every time I go to that chiropractor, I pray as I walk past the clinic, and there's almost always some type of pro-life activist outside, which I'll wave to and thank them for their service. And I do believe it's a service, but they're staying a certain distance away, and they're doing the same thing. Sometimes they'll be preaching, sometimes they'll be praying. Well, what the Department of Justice has determined that the pro-life activists, Chet Gallagher, Coleman Boyd, Heather Idanai, Cal Zastrow, and Paul Vaughn, as well as Dennis Green, are guilty. What they did, they're so guilty, or their crime was so heinous, praying and singing hymns and asking women not to kill their babies, that they should be sentenced to 10 years. They've already been convicted. This is absolutely insane. And by the way, the FACE Act is being misused here because it's been mostly used only or exclusively to prosecute pro-lifers, and on a federal level. This was supposed to be enforced by states, and the law is supposed to protect churches and pregnancy centers as well. Did we ever find out who was demolishing or vandalizing those pro-life centers around the country after Roe v. Wade was overturned? Haven't heard much about that, have we? I mean, this is absolutely insane what we're going through. But guys, I'm telling you, this is a police state. This is how you gain control. And where did this all start? Where did this all start? You guys may not have heard this news because not a lot of people want to talk about it, but I'm going to share it with you because this is where it started. And frankly, I'm a little disappointed that more conservatives don't want justice for this very thing. Hat tip, this is from the Federalist. A grand jury vindicates 5 COVID claims you weren't allowed to say. All right, so following months of fact gathering, a Florida grand jury released its first report on Friday regarding its investigation into potential wrongdoing by COVID vaccine manufacturers and entities who promoted the shots. All right, so this was requested, this grand jury, by Governor Ron DeSantis and authorized by the Florida Supreme Court. In December of 2022, the grand jury at the time was tasked with determining whether, quote, pharmaceutical manufacturers and their executive officers and other medical associations or organizations, close quote, partook in, I'm quoting again, criminal activity or wrongdoing concerning their involvement in the development, approval, or marketing of COVID-19 vaccines, quote unquote. In years prior, individuals who dared to broach such topics online were often censored by big tech at the behest of the federal government. And when they say federal government, we mean Joe Biden's federal government and Joe Biden's homies in big tech. So members of the grand jury, the Federalist Rights, were officially sworn in on June 26 of 2023. Quote, in a way, this grand jury has allowed us to do something that most Americans simply do not have the time, access, or wherewithal to do, and that is follow the science. The interim reports reads, and that was a quote from Governor Ron DeSantis. All right, so the interim report reads, federal agencies like the CDC and the FDA, as well as the U.S. Army, have refused to cooperate with the grand jury, but legally cannot be compelled to testify, according to this report. While the grand jury's investigation is, quote, nowhere near complete, close quote, and has yet to disclose specific details on the shots' safety and efficacy, the interim report provides insight into other facets of Americans' egregious response. All right, so here are some of the things that we learned. 5 things. Highly likely COVID hospitalization numbers were inflated. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, COVID does not harm most children. That's something else that we've learned in the post-COVID era. And when I say post-COVID era, I should say the post-COVID lockdown era, because I think Dennis Prager wrote it correctly, the COVID lockdowns were a dress rehearsal for a police state. That's exactly what all of this stuff is, guys. And this is where, in my opinion, where it started. Yes, I think Barack Obama laid the foundation for the police state when he started using DEI and CRT and a lot of these bureaucratic agencies. But this was the green light. This was the big moment the left was hoping for, where they could totally fundamentally transform America using COVID lockdowns to do so and to test the resolve of the American people. And sadly, many other American people failed and refused to want justice today for this, the biggest atrocity, the biggest threat against America public life that I've seen since. In history. Number 3, public officials ignored pre-existing research. The grand jury found that previous research on non-pharmaceutical interventions didn't work. Number 4, lockdowns did more harm than good. And number 5, mask didn't work. Guys, appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.